Psycho is such an interesting movie to learn about American cultural changes. Um, with its ability to shock and take risks that other movies failed to do, Psycho was an instant success in this country. And cinema would never be the same after movies like Psycho and Jaws in the 60s. Did and do these movies have an effect on violence in American society? I know this question is always asked and always debated, and no one agrees. But to me, this is a resounding no, without a doubt. Because there is no uh, uh, gray area here. The evidence is that violence is not caused by watching horror movies. This belief that horror movies are causing violence is a logical fallacy and not based in proper research, design, deduction. This question that you asked is one of correlation, meaning, is there a relationship? In correlational research, one cannot establish cause and effect relationships because of two issues. One of them being that there is always a possibility of a third variable affecting the two variables that we're looking at, making it seem like violence and horror movies correlate. How can we definitively say that these movies are causing violence? Could something like individual personalities be the reason that some people enjoy horror movies and also have a tendency to be violent? So we can't really see what the right answer here is. Also, we have the problem of directionality between these two variables. And this problem is that we cannot know whether horror movies cause violence or that violence in people increases their interest in horror movies. We just cannot tell which is which, meaning that it is impossible to say that one is causing the other. All in all, it's kind of elementary level thinking that makes people believe that horror movies cause increases in violence. It is too easy for people to deduce this relationship because it makes sense in our heads. We think that horror movies are bad because they show anti-societal normative behaviors that could be seen as taboo or excessive or offensive. The matter of the fact is that people, even children, are better at separating movies from reality than many people would have you think. Research into this belief has supported my answer to this question. Most of the time, when violence is committed, there's an alternate explanation outside of horror movies. For example, some people think horror movies have negatively impacted school shooters when we researched that. While this explanation that horror movies cause the behaviors of school shooters has a simple solution of banning horror movies, there's a more likely source of violence in these people. And that alternate explanation would be psychological disorders. But people do not have a simple solution to treating these disorders, so they just ignore it and blame the horror movies. And it's flawed logic like that that trips even the most intelligent of people into believing that violence is exacerbated by horror movies. Moving on to your second question, I do think Psycho impacted a noticeable trend in the decrease of censorship in the industry in the time period. If you look at the history of movies, you can see that there was a shift right around the time of Psycho and other movies like Jaws into a time where censorship was less prevalent. Before Psycho, movies did not attempt to display such intense scenes of violence in the past because of the society at that time in America. But society was changing. There were wars. There was hatred, hate crimes against minorities. The world was just as scary as these horror movies. So why was there such a ban on movies when the world wasn't censored? Why should movies be banned too? It takes like an audacious stylistic choice to change society in any sort of dramatic manner, and that is true for movies too. It takes bold style choices to have an effect on society or an industry as a whole. The early 60s, as I said, around when Psycho was released, is right where we can see the movie industry shifting toward much less censorship. There was a big change. And it's impossible now to imagine a world where movies are severely censored as they were in the past. Psycho pushed the bounds of sex and violence in movies that other movies shied away from until then. Interestingly, also, some say this is the first film that showed a toilet flushing, which was a censored thing in the past for some reason, which is odd. And it kind of is still odd to show a toilet in movies today for some reason, but that just goes to show how bold Psycho was at the time. The director, Hitchcock, was an established and aging member of the industry when he created Psycho. I think he had kind of had this thought to say, screw it, and decided to make a movie that he wanted to make. Regardless of censorship rules or codes that people followed when making movies in America. I think he was tired of conforming to societal and industry standards, which can suffocate your creativity when you're told not to do something that you wanted to do in your movie. Directors use movies like this one to inspire their work in the aftermath of the Psycho being released. More and more, as the years went on, movies no longer censored on topics like sex, language, and violence as much as they did in the past. We had a more open industry where things that can be uncomfortable were shown because those things happen in real life. Nowadays, there's very little that is censored in the movie industry. We can thank Psycho for a great deal of this change in the standards in censorship. There's a lot of movies today that we love that we would never see if Psycho didn't come out. Just one off the top of my head, I was thinking of Django Unchained, how often they swear in that movie, especially derogatory terms against African Americans. That would have never been shown, probably, even in the 60s. Maybe with racism it could have been shown, but probably not with the amount of swearing it did. Nowadays, when that was released, it was a big hit, and we all loved it, and no one, or very few people, questioned the amount of swearing. They thought more about the content of the movie rather than superficial things about, like, standards of censorship that distract you from the bigger picture of what happened in the movie. Anyways, the ingenuity, success, and lasting legacy of Psycho validated the choice to ignore censorship. People love to watch these topics in films. This country yearns for freedom of expression, so censorship really makes no sense to me in the movie industry. And that is how I think Hitchcock was thinking when he justified his choice in just breaking all codes in making Psycho. And now we're studying it in a class in 2019, which gives you some perspective of how effective his choices were.